When ripping wide sheets, say of particle board or MDF, it is essential that you consider the offcut, because you don't want that dropping at the end of the cut and causing a miscut. So I've got the Triton multi-stand set up here to the side of the work centre, and the multi-stand has a great feature in that you can clamp almost any piece of wood from 30 millimetres to 50 millimetres wide. You can clamp it in the gully there and lock it quite firmly with this knob. That will now provide my outrigger support. If I was dealing with a very long, wide piece, I would have a longer piece of wood with two multi-stands. But because this is a fairly short piece, I can get away with just the one stand. You may notice that I've set the piece of wood up so that there's a little bit of wood in front of the saw blade, but most of it is actually out the back of the machine to give me good tail-out support when I finish the cut. Now I can lift the sheet in a position. Safety guard is set to the correct level. Now it's very important when ripping wide sheets like this that you concentrate on keeping this edge hard up against the fence at all times. The most critical part of this cut is the first, say, 300 millimetres before the wood actually reaches the overhead guard support. Once it reaches that support, that tends to keep the wood parallel to the fence and hard up against the fence. But until you get to that point, you've got to concentrate completely on holding this against the fence. So one hand should go here between the blade and the fence, and the other hand can either go there if you wish, or I prefer to have it at the back. And sometimes it helps to lift the back of the board very slightly off the work centre table. It just seems to help you keep it straight and square and hard up against the fence until you reach the overhead guard support. Having said all that, let's do it. Did you notice also at the end of the cut, I pushed this piece of board sideways slightly because there is a danger that the spinning saw blade will recut that edge, and that could be the next strip that you're cutting, which will have a little bit of damage on it. But this way, it's very easy to rip wide pieces overhanging the edge of the work centre table. If you regularly rip large pieces, then you should check out the Triton sliding extension table. More on that later. As you're no doubt aware, the Triton Series 2000 Workcentre has a phenomenal rip capacity out to 620 millimetres from the blade. Now, in achieving that huge rip capacity, there is naturally enough a gap in the table. That's not a problem with most types of wood that you're cutting, but it can be a problem when you're cutting something thin and flexible like plywood or this white-lined MDF. It's so flexible that it actually nosedives underneath the fence, and you've got no way of controlling it and holding it hard up against the fence. The other problem you'd have is that you'll probably hit the rear fence arm because of the sag in the sheet. Well, there's a very easy fix for that. Take yourself a thin piece of material, 10 to 16 millimetres thick, for example, and nail a couple of blocks, one on each end, so that they just drop over the fence arms, make it a nice snug fit so it's captive there on the fence, and then you can lift the sheet up on that batten, hold it hard up against the fence. You'll avoid snagging the rear fence arm, and you don't have to worry about that differential in height. Because this sheet's so flexible, you can just hold it firmly down on the table and run it through to do your cut without losing any squareness on your edge. Which leaves the last remaining question: how wide can you go on a standard work centre? Well, I'm set up here to rip this 2400 by 1200 sheet, 8 foot by 4 foot. This is not really recommended. You should be using the Triton sliding extension table for this, but you can get away with it for very infrequent use. Bear in mind the maximum rip cut on this setup is only 620 millimetres, so you can't rip the sheet in half. If you did want to cut your sheet down, you may want to consider resting it on the floor on some battens and running your power saw handheld, guided by a clamped-on batten, to get the sheet into a more manageable size before cutting it up to accurate size on your Workcentre. However, as I said, you can get away with it, provided you've got good outboard support. Now, as you can see, I've got two multi-stands clamping a long piece of wood, which is giving me plenty of support before the cut, during the cut, and after the cut. As before, I'm going to concentrate on keeping this edge hard up against the fence, and towards the end of the cut, I'll be very careful in manhandling this piece, but it should stay quite stable because it'll still be sitting on this much Workcentre table plus the multi-stand, which is roughly in the middle of the overhanging piece. In order to switch on the power,